Hello and welcome back to the coverage in the Louise Borglit case. This is the case about the pregnant Louise Borglit who was out walking her sister's dog in a dark November night back in 2016 where she met her murderer. He stabbed her 11 times. One of the stabs took her nose clean off. That has been an uh, important part of this case because the defendant in the case had some knowledge about the nose being gone. He said that his former defendant in another case and some police officers had shown him pictures with the nose gone, and that's why he has this knowledge. We'll return to that today with the witnesses. The case is very unique insofar there is no physical evidence linking this suspect to the murder. This is, I don't know if you can say purely circumstantial, but the biggest part of the evidence for the state in this case is undercover tapings of the defendant while he was in prison in another case, an attempted murder of his ex-girlfriend, where an undercover agent befriended him. The undercover agent had a cover story that he had killed a lady in Portugal, and the defendant was really keen to talk about stabbing people, how to stab people, how to do it, and he was talking a lot about this case. But in court, he has explained, while I was with this guy, I had to act tough like him because I thought he had done these things in Portugal, so I just talked to be a tough guy. We have had a crown witness explaining that at the night of the murder, she was out walking her own dog in this area in Herlev. That's called Elverparken. It's where Louise was stabbed to death. She heard screaming. She saw a black-clad person in a hoodie with the hood drawn up, described him as a disheveled-looking drug addict. She couldn't she haven't seen any pictures of the defendant, so we don't have her picking him out of a lineup or anything. She have made a phantom drawing that looks somewhat like the defendant, but again, we don't really have a smoking gun in this case. We have a lot of talk, and we have a lot of circumstantial evidence that could point to him having a deeper knowledge of the case than what has been covered in the papers. He has explained everything with, well, I was just trying to act tough because the other guy seemed like a tough guy. The people around him who have been witnesses in this case has told a story about a psychiatric patient who was a drug addict, who had a lot of problems. He has been tried in court many times, have done a lot of time in prison. He probably is not the biggest fan of women, and he made a lot of disturbance at the place he lived, and he was a very unstable person around the time of the murder. And the witnesses today backs this story up. The first three witnesses were healthcare professionals at this psychiatric facility. It's called Psykisk Center i Ballerup. The three witnesses were the doctor who saw him right after he admitted himself to the hospital, and then two healthcare workers who worked with this guy while he was in the hospital. Their story was they all believed that he could be the possible perpetrator of the crime. They had the idea, they talked about it, they talked to the police about it. They didn't have anything other than they felt it could be him. He fit the description of a man in a dark hoodie with the hood up. He always walked around like that. They describe him as a person who was dangerous, a person who made people feel unwell. A female nurse at this facility had to go on sick leave while he was admitted to it because she felt very unsafe while he was there. Sorry. But none of them have heard anything about this knife that he supposedly threw away just before he admitted himself to the hospital. So again, we don't know the story about the knife is if it adds up. But they all heard him say something in the line of he had done something gruesome or something terrible. That's the main point we got from all three of those. A bad person, a person they were afraid of, a person who made a lot of trouble in this ward. He was thrown out from this hospital because he sold drugs to other patients. But the main crux, they heard him say something along the lines that he had done something gruesome, he had done something terrible. After those three persons, we had the ex-girlfriend. And this girlfriend is the one he is serving time for an attempted murder and threats against currently. She was a witness who was plagued by bad memories. She was very afraid of this person, and the defense got into her lack of memories and how her memory worked. She said, well, some days I can remember some things, and then tomorrow I can't remember it, but in 3 months' times I can remember it again. So again, you have to factor that in the believability of her story. But she said she knew him from 2017, a year after the murder, and she told about his personality, especially while doing drugs. He could be nice and friendly, and then it changed. Then he got evil, and he has beaten her, he has threatened her a lot of times. So she was very afraid of him. She also told that he had taught her how to kill a person with a knife, and that he had told her that a witness in another case, he wanted to stab that person in the belly. He was a guy who had a deep fascination for knife. We have heard that from his friends and another day in court, that he was really interested in knives. He had knives all over the apartment, and when he went out, he was in the drug environment, so he had a knife, he had pepper spray, he had brass knuckles when he went out for safety. But again, he talked about he was able to smelling blood, but she couldn't remember him ever telling her about killing somebody. But again, as the caretakers at the hospital said, he had a personality that could switch in a second. And the defense keep going into her memory problems, and she said, yeah, well, all this beating and all these threats have made me have a bad memory. So she had some troubles remembering what happened. But she also said he was a guy who lied a lot and manipulated a lot. We'll return to that when his uncle is on the witness stand. The next witness was a guy who done time done time with him in prison, and to this guy, he had the same experience with him. He's a nice guy, and then the switch flips, and then he's evil, then he's nasty. To this person, he should multiple times have said that he had stabbed someone in a wood or in a park, and he talked about she just had to die. She deserved to die. And he said, she. And he took note of that, but he thought he was just making fun. But when it got into the papers that this person was arrested in this case, he contacted the police and told them about his experience with him in prison. He should have told this inmate multiple times that he stabbed somebody to death. He believed he had been told the name, but he couldn't remember the name that he supposedly stabbed to death. The defendant told this inmate that he got rid of the knife and a totally different place than any of the other stories we heard today. So again, there's different stories about this murder weapon where it's supposedly be disposed. Then we had his uncle telling about back in 2016, the defendant was desperate. He was very unhappy. His family has cut all ties to him. He was desperately in need of money because he was being thrown out of his apartment. And he was contacting the uncle at odd times of the day, and the uncle was very afraid of him. He feared he could be dangerous to have him walking around on the street, so he wanted him admitted to the psychiatric ward. But he contacted the authorities, and some of them had talks with him, but nothing happened. Um, they asked him about if the defendant was a liar, if he was a man who made up stories. And he said, yeah, some time ago he told about uh, a christening, because he had become a dad, so there will be a christening at this church at that hour. And the uncle said, well, are you sure? And he said, yeah, yeah, it'll be that day. And the uncle showed up, and there was no christening. So again, a witness who says, yeah, he's known to lie. He makes up stories. Um, the uncle finished by telling that on the day of the murder, the defendant called him and said, now everything doesn't matter. What he meant by it, we don't know. But again, it's it's an indication that around the time of the murder, he was in a very bad state. Then they brought in his former defender to corroborate the story about the defender showing him the autopsy photos, and the defense lawyer said, "Well, I have had many cases. I don't know," and so we didn't get anything from him. And the final witness was a police officer who had this person as suspect number one when he was working in as a detective. He talked to him twice, once in a prison down in the southern part of Denmark, and another time when they tossed his cell to see if he had anything on the cell. And when they searched his cell, he told a story about the defendant had brought up Louise Borglit and talked badly about her. He was then asked if he shown any of the autopsy photos to the defendant, so he had the knowledge about the nose being cut off from him, and he said, no, I don't do that. And then he was asked, are you sure? And then he said, well, I don't usually do that. And he said, I can't with 100% certainty say I didn't do it. So again, the defense poked some holes in the state's case again today. They made it clear he's a guy who lies a lot. He's a guy who makes up stories. He could have seen the photos of the autopsy as he claims, because neither his former lawyer or the police officer could rule out that they have shown it to him. But again, this case, it's hard to say which way it would go. Today, I thought they painted a good picture of a dangerous, desperate man. So it'll be interesting to see if we corroborate those with another set of witnesses. But we'll have to wait and see when they're back in court. And until then, I'll just thank you very much for watching. And I hope you like my coverage. If you do, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.